Namaste. Today we are going to watch why Britain advanced before other European nations. When I used to read about like how India was colonized by Britain, I used to think like Britain would be a very big nation and the biggest nation of them all. But the moment I realized that Britain is just a small nation, and that tiny nation like had so many empires, and like the thing was they were so powerful at one point of time. I used to always had that question that how they became so powerful. And then I got to know that okay, all the European powers were powerful, but then I got to know that Britain were even then more powerful than all the European powers, because like Dutch were also one of those who used to go into the lands and conquer them. Even Portuguese used to do it, but Spanish used to do it, but the best one who used to do was Britain. So they used to do it very well way. So how was it, and why would they do it? Let's see this.
And in the previous video, we got to know that the technology is far different from India in Britain, and even we have watched that electric switch video where they saw they're basically on that video a person showed us very the things, the unique thing which you can only found in the Britain, and we were so shocked after watching that video. And we also got to know that you people are so advanced, and and after watching that video I was I was so shocked, and I was thinking that we are not living in the 2020, we are living in the 2023 or 2020. We are living in the 90s, it seems like that. But today we are going to know why Britain advanced before other European nations. Maybe in this video, obviously they're gonna talk about the development which Britain did from the last few years, and obviously they're gonna talk about the history, that why it had become so advanced as compared to the other European countries. So definitely it would be a very informative video for us. And to be honest, I was not aware that much about the information about the Britain, but as I'm watching these videos, to be honest, I'm getting a lot of information about the Britain. And previously we have also seen so many videos from there too, we got a lot of information. So yeah, I'm so much excited to watch this video, so let's watch the video.
It would be very interesting to know like why Britain did it all before all the European countries. So let's start the video.
Patterns of conquest have not been determined solely by technology or even by culture in general. Geography, including disease environments, has played a major role in the history of conquest, as it has in the history of cultural evolution in general. The steppes of Central Asia and the plains of Eastern Europe have been far better settings for cavalry charges than the mountainous terrain of the Balkans or the heavily forested parts of Central Europe, while island nations such as Britain and Japan have of course been wholly immune. China tried to create the effects of natural barriers with its Great Wall, as Hadrian's Wall in Britain and the Maginot Line in pre-war France attempted the same thing on a smaller scale. Geographic barriers have spared some peoples from conquest or delayed its coming. Mountainous terrain has permitted independence to persist in some places long after the adjoining lowlands have been overrun by invaders. Morocco, Ceylon, Abyssinia, Scotland, and Tibet are just some of the places in which this has been so.
Yeah.
However, geographical barriers have been a mixed blessing, as technological and cultural backwardness have likewise been the fates of many of these isolated regions. Moreover, the relative poverty of such regions has also been one of the deterrents to conquest, along with the fighting abilities of mountain men, for there was little or no profit to be had from the conquest of many such areas. Differential resistance to one another's diseases, which played a key role in the conquest of the Western Hemisphere, retarded the conquest of Africa until much later in history, because it was the indigenous peoples who succumbed to new, mixed disease environments in the Americas, while it was the Europeans who were fatally vulnerable to the diseases of tropical Africa until quinine and other modern medical and public health measures made it possible for them to survive amid the tropical diseases that flourished south of the Sahara. The Atlantic and Pacific Oceans long protected the indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere from the conquerors of the rest of the world, And, even as late as the first half of the 20th century, these oceans made isolationism a viable option for the United States, as it was not for most of the nations of Europe or Asia. However, smaller bodies of water may facilitate rather than impede military attacks, for huge differences between the high cost of land transport and the low cost of water transport can be as important militarily as it has been economically. During the Crimean War, for example, the British and the French attacking forces were supplied by water, while the Russian defenders at Sevastopol had to be supplied by land, since the waters were controlled by British and French warships. Even with approximately 125,000 peasant carts requisitioned to supply the defenders from their own adjacent homeland, their limited supplies of ammunition did not permit them to reply in kind to the barrages fired at them from the sea. Nor was this simply a matter of conditions favoring attackers or defenders in general. Both in Spain and in Russia, Napoleon's attacking armies met disaster when they had to be supplied over land, while the opposing armies were supplied across water.
Yeah.
The inaccessibility of African rivers to ocean-going warships made this continent less vulnerable to European naval power than much of the Western Hemisphere was. The Dutch, for example, could send ocean-going vessels more than 100 miles up the Hudson River to establish an outpost at what would later become the city of Albany. No river in Africa was that accessible, whether due to insufficient water levels or, more commonly, sandbars, cascades, and waterfalls.
Oh.
The shallow coastal waters in many parts of sub-Saharan Africa meant that large European warships could often not get close enough to the shore in many places, necessitating the loading of European troops into smaller boats, which could in many places be effectively opposed by Africans in similar-sized boats, particularly in the early centuries before European firearms had developed the accuracy and speed of firing that they would have in later eras. The history of the British people, like the history of other peoples around the world, illustrates the enormous importance of human capital, whether in the form of specific skills, general education, or traditions
The
and
Royal Navy
laws that
played an
facilitate
important role.
both economic development and the development of free institutions. The many centuries that it took for the British to rise from cultural and economic backwardness to the forefront of world civilization in technology and political dominance suggests something of the difficulty of acquiring the necessary human capital. The vital role played in this process by numerous other peoples who came to the British Isles, whether as conquerors, immigrants, or refugees, also suggests how important cultural diffusion is. The Romans, the Normans, the Jews, the Lombards, and the Huguenots all contributed in important ways at different historical junctures to what would ultimately become a British achievement. The geography of the British Isles also played an important role, not in determining what people would do, but in determining the boundaries of what was possible. The simple fact that Britain is an island nation, and that water transport is vastly cheaper than land transport, and was especially so in the era before railroads, meant that the British could transport heavy raw materials, like coal, to different parts of the United Kingdom much more cheaply and rapidly than was possible within nations with large interiors, such as Germany or the United States, both of which had to wait for the era of railroads to challenge the British in industrialization.
Yes.
The fact that the key raw materials of the industrial age, iron ore and coal, were located very near each other and also near navigable waterways in Britain again gave the British decisive early advantages over
Geographical
countries like
advantages.
Germany and the United States, as well as permanent advantages over regions of the world where such natural resources do not exist at all and cannot be imported at any feasible economic cost. Significantly, Japan, one of the few countries that was later able to rise to the industrial forefront without such natural resources, is an island like Britain, and no part of Japan is more than 70 miles from the sea. So imported raw materials could be brought in economically, as would be virtually impossible in the Balkans or in much of sub-Saharan Africa, for example, due to more formidable geographical barriers in these places. Geographical advantages and cultural imports have permitted more to be accomplished within the British Isles than in many other parts of the world, but ultimately it was the British themselves who had to accomplish it, That they did so has had enormous consequences, not only for the inhabitants of the United Kingdom or even for past and present members of the British Empire or Commonwealths, but for the entire world. The highly varying degrees to which different segments of the British population acquired the necessary human capital demonstrates that the opportunity alone is not sufficient for economic or other accomplishments. Nor was it simply a matter of what the existing society permitted to different groups, for those same groups showed similar economic and social patterns when transplanted to other societies in North America or in Australia and New Zealand. British law and its traditions of impartiality.
So it's majorly, I think so, two things. Like majorly, it is geography also, and the other thing that he mentioned was like how British people were also like, this is a very big thing because the British people went to America, and then whole the American population went into it. Okay, they killed all the the people that were living there, but yes, they made their whole population, and they were like striving to make like this country big, and this country very good, and now we see what America is. And similarly, like how they traveled to Australia and they settled in Australia, and they made Australia one of those countries, and again they threw like the natives away. And they, I think they might have tried similar in India, but I think so in India, because of the huge population already there, they knew that they could not overthrow them, so they tried to rule them, and they did that very successfully, I think so, because of their might and power, and also the way their navy was. I think so they were able to understand that making a good navy is very important at that point of time, and they took full advantage of it.
And I do believe that the
Made London.
geographical basis was geographical point was good point. But on the other side, the Britishers were also so hardworking. They did basically they took a full advantage of the resources as they could too, and even they also got to they also get to know that. That if they use the water for the export of the raw materials, then definitely that thing would be so cheap as compared to the land one. So we have to say that the you people were so basically Britishers were so smart and the hardworking, that that's the only thing that made the Britain advance before other European nations.
Made London a magnet for the capital of the world, enabling Britain to industrialize with other people's capital as well as its own. In a later era, the British colony of Hong Kong would similarly attract capital from around the world by the dependability and impartiality of its laws, while many poverty-stricken countries were unable to obtain much-needed capital because of their undependable laws and confiscatory policies toward foreign investors. British law was, of course, more than an economic asset. Its separation of powers and rights of citizens against the government were the foundation of the freedom of the British themselves. The revolutions of the 17th century, including the beheading of King Charles I in 1649 and the uprisings in 1688 that led James II to flee to France, made the separation of powers even more dramatically vindicated and an indelible part of the British Constitution. While many other countries copied British systems of law and government, those that succeeded in creating similarly free governments were largely those that came from the same tradition, the United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, for the historical experiences that were distilled into powerful traditions were essential to the functioning of the legal and political institutions themselves. While these institutions could be copied by anyone, the history and traditions behind them could not be synthesized, and it was these intangibles that made the tangible institutions and structures work.
Seriously, this video was so informative for both of us, and we got to know that if the Britain became advanced only because of its geography and only because of its smartness and hard work. Like for example, if the Britain people didn't use their smartness, and if they were not so much hardworking, then definitely they would not achieve their goal. Then they would never became so advanced. So we have to say that on their success, their hard work and their intelligence was behind was was into it, and definitely they they took the best advantage of the resources as they could do. And even the firstly they had more water as compared to the land, so they took so they obviously so they also took the advantage of it. They started using the water they started using oceans for the exporting of the raw materials, rather the land one, because they got to know that the land one, land export would be more costly as compared to the ocean one. So basically, behind it was only their intelligence. And we also got to know in the Britain there were also coal, iron. So obviously so they also took the benefit of it. So yeah, this video was so informative, and we got to know a lot of things from this.
Actually, the thing was, it was all about like how British did it before other European countries. It was not a direct comparison, but it just showed how good Britishers were and British people were. Like it was an amalgamation of everything. Like British people took the opportunity and they were like they were ready to leave their country to go to a new country and settle there. So it was their thing also, because normally what we saw at that point of time, like people were not ready to go out of their own country and to settle into new places and do those things. But Britishers were ready. They went to Australia, America, Canada, and all these places, and they conquered those places. And even in India, like coming from Britain, I think so it would be very difficult for many British people to live here. But just to conquer us and just to make sure that they have that power, they always like had people coming in here, and also people also were living in here. And I read about it, like okay, many people used to live here because they used to live in sun, because yes, it is always kind of dark in Britain, so that is the way it is. So they like to live in sun, so many people used to come here in the summers and then go back. So it was like that. And the thing was, so it was all about how British people did it and how their geography also helped them in doing it. So and now what we see with US also, how US's geography is protecting itself from all the country, like all the countries, if they have to attack USA, then they have to go by through all those seas. And even if they have to go by planes also or fighter jets also, then they have to travel a lot to reach USA. Only Canada and Mexico are some countries that we can say are very close to, and they do not have any problems with USA. So this is now the advantages with USA that the advantage British people had. So what do you guys think about it? Do let us know in the comment section below. So do like, share, and
Subscribe.